Well, guys, great to be speaking to everybody. And sorry I couldn't be there in person, but it feels like nowadays everything is sort of hybrid anyway. I'm sure you're all experiencing that in your personal and professional lives. So I sort of want to preface today's chat by framing it around the idea that I and my career am a perfect example of recognizing that if you're a storyteller and you want to pursue a career in this crazy industry of show, um, it's not always a straight line. And the thing that, if there's one takeaway that I really want to impress upon all of you guys, is that I know that each of you has the capacity, even though I don't know any of you personally, to write that great spec screenplay that gets sold for a ton of money, or write that pilot that gets the hot showrunner and becomes, the next new thing on Netflix. But maybe that doesn't happen. And the question becomes, does that mean that you can't have a role in an industry as a writer and as a storyteller? Which I can definitively say the answer to that is no. So let's start with me. My family originally came from Israel. We moved to the States when I was about 8 years old. My mom was a social worker. My dad was a journalist, and we had no connection to the entertainment industry or anything like that. When I was around 15, my dad's editors for the newspaper that he wrote for in Israel, he was their foreign correspondent, said, we have a story we want you to write on an Israeli director who's making his English language debut for a film shooting here in California. We want you to go interview him. So my dad went to do that, and he picked me up from school and he said, I'm taking you to this thing. And I was like, why? That sounds boring as shit. I don't want to go to work with you. But he's like, you're coming with me. And I remember walking on this set and immediately being like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing that I've ever seen. The movie starred at the time, probably before any of you were even born, a just out of rehab Drew Barrymore. I think was 18 years old at the time. And what ended up happening is that it was about to be winter break for my high school. So I ended up working as like an office PA intern on that show. And I remember that then it was time to go back to school. And I said to my parents, hey, I really would love to, kind of skip this semester and just work on movies. And they looked at me like I was out of my mind. And I wasn't yet driving. One morning, I'm sorry? Oh, I thought. Oh, gotcha. And they took me to the school bus one morning, and once they left, I ran across the street, I got on the city bus, and I went to the set, and I forged a note, sent it to my high school saying that we had, like, my grandma had passed away and we had to go back to Israel. So I bought myself like 2.5 weeks of time where I could do that. I was still going to do my homework, and I almost got away with it. And then my mom ended up finding out what I had done. And she, she put me on lockdown. She grounded me for like a year, seemingly. But what I had expressed to her is, I said, look, I've found something I'm incredibly passionate about. I want to be able to do that. And she said, well, school's a priority. So I took summer school and I took extra classes. And by the time I was in my senior year of high school, I only had to go to classes for an hour and a half a day, because that was the only credits that I had left. And then I went to go work on the lot at 20th Century Fox, which is at Pico, in the West LA area. And I did that, and then I somehow still managed to get a scholarship to go to college, and I went to USC. I was not in the film school, however. And then life circumstances and other things happened that meant that I didn't stay in school. And a guy I had gone to high school with, his dad and his dad's writing partner were about to be showrunners on a television show, which was the first TV show put out by the mega producer Jerry Bruckheimer, a name I'm sure you're all familiar with. And this was even before CSI. It was like in the mid-90s. And that show was called Soldier of Fortune. And it was kind of like ex-military who were now in black ops, were called upon by the US government to take on cases that the government could never admit to being involved with. So I was the showrunner's assistant / writer's assistant. And this was a time long before there was Hulu or Amazon or Netflix or HBO Max, where seasons of TV were 20 to 25 episodes per season. So this particular show, they had a writing staff that wrote 20 of the episodes, and then they gave 5 freelance assignments. And I was 19 at the time, and I said to myself, I'm going to get one of those freelance assignments. And assignment 21 went to a writer. Assignment 22 went to a writer. It was down to assignment 25. And one of the writers on the writing staff, I worked with them, and I submitted my script, and I felt, very proud of myself and my chest puffed out. And my bosses kind of side-eyed me. They're like, you're kind of jumping ahead in the line. And I said, look, if this is not as good or better than everything else you've done, then, I'll shut the hell up and kind of, know my place. And they read it, and although they didn't make that particular script, they did give me a staff writer position for season 2 of the show. So season 2 rolled around, and this was amazing. I bet on myself and taken a big risk. And I had some success when I was 16 and 17 as a playwright as well. So I won the California Young Playwrights competition 2 years in a row. So I was feeling good, and I felt like I was on the right path to, have some real success. And then they decided, how do we make a show about Black Ops mercenaries, military propaganda? How do we make that even better? And they hired the Chicago Bulls basketball star, Dennis Rodman, to be one of the new leads of the show. And then the show was canceled about 5 months later, because a dude who's like 7 feet tall with 15 piercings in his face is probably not the right kind of vibe for that. But hey, they did something interesting. The showrunners had an overall deal at Warner Television. So they asked me to be their head of development. And we sold a couple different things, nothing that ever got beyond the pilot stage. But around this time, there was this bright, shiny new toy that was not Web 3, not Web 2, and barely Web 1, but it was the internet. And people were starting to say, hey, maybe this is a new platform to create content and tell stories. And, this was really, broadband was just at its beginning. People still had really slow connections. So there were companies called the American Cybercast Corporation. And there was a really hot show, kind of the Melrose Place of its day, called Grape Jelly. And just really random stuff that nowadays you could probably find a Wikipedia entry for. But one of the things that I recognized was that there was an opportunity, I felt, not to teach people how to be better writers, but to teach them how to sell their writing. So I went to my 2 bosses and I said, I have an idea for a website that we'll call tvpitch.com, which is, how do you actually perfect your pitch so that you can write something that you're very passionate about and walk into a room and sell it? And they're like, sure, go for it. And then we were going to give all that content away for free, but we were going to monetize the site by offering a script reading and review service, supposedly from experts in the field, showrunners and staff writers and writer producers and what have you. And we would charge a certain amount of money if it was a comedy script, which tend to be half hour, even though nowadays that doesn't really mean anything anymore, and then hour-long scripts. Remember, there was no social media at this point. So I was sort of a little bit of like an amateur hacker kind of geek. And I found a way to write a piece of code and a piece of software that would let me spam all of the university listservs of every university in the country that had a film school. So I sent tons of emails. I had an AOL account at the time, and I violated their terms of service. So my AOL account got canceled. But I was able to do that. And I felt like we were definitely onto something when not 50, not 100, not 500, but 4,000 people submitted scripts to us over a 6-month period. And I was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing in the world. Except I had no plan or readers to actually read and review the scripts. And my bosses were like, yeah, we're not doing that shit. Figure it out. So I was definitely a little overwhelmed, but I managed to do it. And it made me realize that one of the great promises of what the digital space and the internet and digital media could do was, in some respects, level the playing field. It allowed access. And remember, this is before you could, send a tweet or an Instagram post to your favorite celebrity. But it allowed more readily available access than writing a letter and putting it in the mail and hoping that somebody's agent or manager or fan club president would read it. And I thought, well, if it worked this successfully in the TV writing space, what about in other artistic disciplines? What about in the culinary arts? What about in the fine arts, in the performing arts? And I thought this was a real opportunity for a business. So I went back to my old roommate from USC who was going to business school. And I said, I've never written a business plan before, but can you help me write one? And we wrote a business plan for a venture that was called mycreativity.com. And think of it kind of like Masterclass before that was ever a thing meets MySpace, for those of you old enough to even remember what that was. And we launched the platform with the goal of saying, we need to have like big celebrities in each of the verticals that we're involved in. So someone introduced me to Wolfgang Puck, the famous chef, and he was the celebrity in the culinary channel, and we gave him some shares in the company. And then we found somebody in the music business who would do that, and then we found somebody from the Joffrey Ballet who would be in our dance category, et cetera, et cetera. And I managed to raise enough money to build like a working beta of the platform. And we managed to get about 25,000 active users. And then we said, okay, now we need to raise the real money to go out into the marketplace and kind of take it to the next level. And of course, that was around the time in the early aughts, in the early 2000s, when the stock market completely collapsed, called Black Monday, I think. And ultimately, the ways of being able to raise money kind of quickly went away. So I had to pivot, figure out what my next move was. But one of the people who we had gotten for our advisory board was the former head of Sony Pictures, who was a writer-producer in his own right by the name of Peter Guber. Peter's known today primarily for being one of the owners of the Dodgers, the Golden State Warriors, LAFC, which is one of the premier Major League Soccer clubs in the States, and then owner of the #2 esports team called Team Liquid in the world. And I went to him and we sort of hit it off, and he hired me as the head of digital media for his company, Mandalay Entertainment. I'm sure you guys have heard of Mandalay. They made movies like the Wesley Snipes, Robert De Niro movie, The Fan, or the Sleepy Hollow movie with Johnny Depp and Christina Ricci, or I Know What You Did Last Summer, and that whole franchise. And my job at the company, and I was like 23 at the time, was being able to create digital assets, so websites and experiences to support the movies, the television shows, and at the time, minor league sports clubs that he owned. And then ultimately to build a business of how do we create original shows for the internet. And then that evolved over time. There was a big sea change in the first decade of this millennium, where BMW made a series of really sophisticated short films with major directors. So this new concept called branded entertainment emerged. It was a little different than product placement because it was more about how the brand could become a seamless part of the story. So as the head of digital, I was sort of tasked with creating the cross programming that would support those kind of initiatives. And eventually it went from just me to me managing a staff of about 7, and with a P&L, with managing an operating budget of about $2.5 million. And we did some cool stuff. We made content for major brands, and we worked with major technology companies. But then the marketplace changed, and I think by the time I was around 26, 27, it was time to go on and try something new. So I founded a video game company called Vicarious Entertainment. I co-founded it. And we realized that instead of creating our own IP, one of the areas where there was inefficiencies in the video game business was that the creators weren't great artists. So my partner and I built a company that would essentially take over all the game art responsibility. We would be responsible for how the games look. So we got hired by Ubisoft and Konami and Electronic Arts and all of the big players. And we did the Simpsons game, and we did, at the time, the third film in the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, Return of the King, and we created the game for that, and we did a bunch of other cool things. And that company got acquired by a Chinese company, and I took my first trip to Shanghai at a time when they were undergoing major technology, a major boom, a construction boom. And I was like, yeah, I'm not built for this. I don't think this is this is what I'm going to do. So I sold my interest in that company. I came back to the States, and a buddy of mine had started a business where he was licensing old TV shows from studios and independent distributors and creating DVD box sets for them. So I bought into that company and I became a partner in that company, and we licensed Xena Warrior Princess, we licensed Hercules, we licensed Highlander, and a bunch of other cool stuff. And then I got the opportunity to go back to Peter Guber, who had a talk show with Peter Bart, who at the time was the editor-in-chief of Variety, the trade publication. And they had a Sunday morning talk show that was all about the entertainment industry, kind of like the Sunday morning news shows that I'm sure you guys are familiar with today, like Meet the Press and Face the Nation, etc. Their show was called Sunday Morning Shootout. And Shootout became a really strong brand, and they had amazing guests. Everyone who was anybody in Hollywood came on that show. So I licensed that show. We took certain episodes, reformatted them into a product called Film School in a Box, powered by Sunday Morning Shootout. And it was almost like, for people who didn't get an LMU or USC or UCLA, this would be like everything you need to know from the best cinematographers in the world, the best directors, the best production designers, the best writers, producers, etc. So we did an exclusive for that with Best Buy, and we sold about 30,000 units of that. But then, of course, that business changed because the studios were like, hey, if we're going to license these shows to people, we're going to ask them to pay us huge amounts of money as an advance. So all of a sudden, it went from like they were begging us to take their stuff to we were sitting meeting about the Bruce Willis Sybil Shepherd show Moonlighting, and we had gotten the opportunity to license it, and I was going to put out this amazing box set. And they said, great, all you have to do now is write us a check for an advance against sales for $2 million. And I turned to my partner and I'm like, yeah, we ain't built for this anymore. But we had a business that still had an infrastructure. We had edit bays and camera equipment and resources. So we went back to all our clients and said, look, we're not going to license the content from you anymore, but let us become your vendor who does all that work. And our business actually increased 20-fold. Maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe 10-fold. Because all of a sudden we were able to take on work because we didn't have to worry about, oh, we have to license and pay advances and whatever. We're just like, throw us all your DVD box sets. And we got to do work for Disney and Fox and Warner's and Sony and got Lionsgate and got to make some great content in that regard. I then sold that company, and then I went to work for a film marketing and advertising agency that was based in Burbank called, at the time it was called CMP, Craig Murray Productions. Today it's known as Motion. And one of CMP's big clients was the Walt Disney Company. And what the division that I ended up working under, because I was doing the TV to DVD thing, was the kind of creative content behind the scenes unit. And we would do that same thing for the studios. And they said to me at one point, hey, we've got a great guy who runs creative content over at Disney, and we'd love for you and the team to go and sit down with them. And I did, and that was your professor, Jay Williams. So we got the opportunity to meet and became fast friends. And then I started to realize at that point, hey, didn't I used to want to be a writer? Because I was still writing, but I was doing it differently. And the guy who I was reporting to at CMP, one day he said to me, hey, I have a side hustle doing marketing consulting for this financier that has an output deal at Warner Brothers. I think they'd really like you. Come to the meeting with me. And that company was called Alcon Entertainment. And they've made movies that you've seen like My Dog Skip and Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants and Book of Eli and The Blind Side. And about a month into working with them, we were in a meeting one morning, and at the end of the meeting, I said, guys, can I ask you a huge favor? I want to pitch you guys a movie idea. And I tried to marshal that same kind of youthful arrogance that I had as that 19-year-old kid who was like, I'm going to get one of the spec script assignments on the Jerry Bruckheimer show. And after a moment of them rolling their eyes and saying, hey, you should kind of stay in your lane, they're like, okay, you have 2 minutes, pitch us the idea. And I told them that morning I had seen on the Today Show a story about a dolphin that had gotten caught in a crab trap in the Indian River in the Gulf of Mexico, just off the coast of Florida, near Tampa. And by the time the dolphin got rescued, the blood supply to its dorsal fin had been cut off and had to be amputated. And they thought that the dolphin would die, but a team of scientists and prostheticians built a prosthetic tail for it. Anyways, 2-minute pitch became 10-minute pitch. By the time I was done with it, they're like, yo, that's a fucking, pardon my language, that's a great movie idea. We're gonna partner with you to produce it. And I'm like, I raised my hand and I'm like, hey, I kind of would like to write it. And they're like, do you even know how to write? So I sent them some specs, and thus began the journey starting in around 2006. For writing a movie that became Dolphin Tale, which was released by Warner Brothers and Alcon in 2011. And it starred Morgan Freeman, Ashley Judd, Harry Connick Jr. I was the original writer. And as is often the case, because I wanted to think I was the greatest thing since sliced bread, the greatest writer since, Waldo Salt or whatever random name I could come up with. But the Writers Guild strike in 2007 had happened, and they said, hey, we love what you did. We're going to bring in another writer to do a polish on your script. We're going to bring in the writer of Free Willy 2. Not even Free Willy, it was Free Willy 2. But needless to say, that was a journey in its own right. And part of what was so important about that also was writing that script put me in the Writers Guild. And, studios often write by committee. So this writer came in and then another writer. And by the time the movie was getting ready to be made, 7 writers had had their hands on it. And there was going to be an arbitration. And I was concerned that they were going to try and take everything away from me, and maybe I would get shared story credit. But the Writers Guild, which I hope all of you have an opportunity to join when you sell your work to a signatory company, ultimately was a great advocate for me. It gave me my first big writing credit in Hollywood. And then the sequel to Dolphin Tale was made in 2014. While I developed the story for that, I was not the writer on it, but I still got to work on the film, which was really great. And then I realized, hey, I'm not getting any younger. I really got to get back in the game. And I partnered for a while with an actor in Hollywood and ran his production company. And then eventually he and I reconnected with Jay, because Jay was the executive at a company making a show that my partner at the time was starring in. And the three of us started a company in 2015 called Legion of Creatives. And the idea then was, this was a time, I'm pretty sure you're all old enough to remember this. You probably were in middle school or high school, maybe a little older. This was a time where premium short form content was all the rage. Before Quibi kind of dropped the ball on everything, things got kind of, everyone wanted to be in the short form business, and we really excelled in that space. So the video game company Ubisoft, they hired us to create the live action version of the Ghost Recon game. And we made that as a pilot, and that had its world premiere on Twitch and then went to Amazon Prime. And then we had a first look deal at ABC, where before there was Disney Plus, they were developing premium kind of digital content, and we were one of their main producers that was doing that. So we sold a couple shows, we shot a couple pilots, and that was kind of a really cool experience in that regard. And then based on the success of all that, AMC, that was really just starting to launch AMC Plus, came to us and said, look, we have to create kind of content for our premium subscriber tier. We're going to do a short form series of The Walking Dead, which at the time I think was in its 8th season. So Walking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead were out. Worlds Beyond was not out. The new other thing wasn't out, etc. And we created a short form series that had 14 episodes that was called The Walking Dead Red Machete. And Jay and I, who had already, in fact, working with our previous partner, won the first Emmy for creating live action scripted content in VR with the second Oculus headset in 2014 that we did for the show Sleepy Hollow that premiered at Comic-Con. We then got nominated for our second Emmy as the producers and showrunners of The Walking Dead show. So that felt like a great validation and recognition of the work we had done. And then the business changed. A lot of these short form entities, they shut down. Jay and I are probably the few producers you will have ever met who had the distinction of being in negotiation to sell shows to 3 different of these networks, all of whom went out of business within 90 days of us selling shows to them, which was kind of a crazy thing in its own right. And then, we figured we would get more into the long form space, but that wasn't necessarily our expertise in terms of being producers of, independent features. And I think we just looked at the marketplace and said, maybe we need to pivot to other stuff. So Jay got into running a content studio that was doing 4D films and location-based experiences. So, ride movies and stuff that you'd see at like Universal or Walt Disney World or awesome amusement parks in China or Dubai or other places like that. And we produced some stuff there together. And I sort of felt like I really needed to change. Like Hollywood, I love our industry, but it's also has occasionally bad actors. And I don't mean actors, I mean bad people, as we've seen, in the last 5 years. And I just needed a palate cleanser. So I had been a member of an arts and culture nonprofit called Reboot, that was about rebooting culture through art, kind of social action through art, supported by Steven Spielberg's Righteous Persons Foundation and the Bronfman Family Philanthropy. And they were launching a content studio and they needed somebody to run it. And I've been the head of that for about 3 years now. And we recently put together a creator fund that is really supporting artists, because the nonprofit is through a Jewish organization. So we're really trying to support the creativity of Jews of color and just kind of tell stories that uplift and elevate. And that is me in a nutshell. So I share all that with you, and I thank you so much for listening patiently to really say the following. I started my earliest writing success as a playwright when I was still in high school. Then just even before, I dropped out of college. And before I even was 20, I had sold a teleplay and became a staff writer on a television series. And then I got into the internet space, and then I got into the video game space, and then I got into the marketing space, and then I got back into screenwriting and had some success there, and then VR, and then games, and then podcasts, because I've produced a couple of successful podcasts as well. And the through line for me is the sort of bastardization of the Marshall McLuhan quote, which is the medium is the message, which is I know that stories are in our DNA as mankind. Cave paintings were stories. Shamans around the campfire were stories. the cathode ray tube, the radio, the internet. All of those are mediums, but stories are always going to be stories. AI can replace a lot of things. Automation can take away a lot of jobs, but they're never going to be a writer. They're never going to do what all of you do as writers, as producers, as creative practitioners in this space. And the thing I realized in my own career, and I've been incredibly fortunate, is two things have always mattered to me. Being a storyteller, and because the only reason I achieved that goal was because of the belief and support of mentors and others who were more successful, who were willing to give me a shot. And that leads to the other thing that matters to me, which is creating the platform that can elevate the stories of others, marginalized creators who don't have equity, who don't have that seat at the table, that maybe myself and Jay and the successes we've had and the people who we work with can give them opportunities, and we can support their storytelling, whether it's BIPOC communities or LGBTQ communities or Latino, Latinx communities. Those matter to me because frankly, those are the stories I want to see. I love storytelling, and I don't want to see stories. I've been seeing stories that reflect my lived experience since I was a kid. I want to see stories that reflect the lived experience of other people, and I want to help those people be able to tell their stories on their terms. And that's me.
It's amazing, Noam. Thank you for going through that. And I think, look, I would also say the message there is determination. At any given point in time, you could have easily thrown your hands up and went, well, that was a good experiment, but didn't quite work the way I thought it should. But instead, you kind of kept reinventing yourself. You kept looking at the tea leaves, and you were actually taking those opportunities as they were coming, around you. And I think that's an important lesson for everyone is, yeah, whether you graduate and you're a screenwriter or you're a writer that wants to write for television, at the end of the day, you're a storyteller, and you really have to have an open mind in this business because there's so much more than just the traditional path, especially today. I mean, you're kind of proof of that, right?
Yeah, and Jay, look, here's what's important. Right now, and I'm sure everyone in class knows this, the video game business generates about 3 to 4 times the revenue of the movie business. And that the reality of it is the whole concept of cinematic storytelling and narrative storytelling has parlayed into games. Obviously, it's parlayed into podcasts. I think there are a number of different ways to be a storyteller. And I am focused on making sure that people recognize that film and TV, in the sense that maybe we've been accustomed to it in the past, that's not even the thing that most young people, and I assume this is true of many of the people who are sitting here with us today, when I was teaching at LMU for a number of semesters, I always wanted to know, like, what's the hottest thing on TikTok you're focused on, or Instagram, or are there any live streaming platforms like Caffeine or Triller or other places where you're experiencing content? Because the truth of the matter, whether we call them influencers or creators or whatever, the great talent of tomorrow are not people solely who kind of went the film school route. They're people who had something to say and wanted to say it and figured out a way to do it.
Yeah, that's absolutely very true. And no, let me ask you, I mean, obviously we've all experienced those challenges in our career. I mean, what's the thing that keeps you motivated? What keeps you kind of moving forward when you have those challenges?
I remember, Jay, being in high school, and I was in an AP English class, and I read a book. It was an English language adaptation of a book by a French author named Camus, and it was called The Stranger. And I can honestly tell you, I don't know if the rest of you have had this experience of seeing a movie or reading a book or something that you feel literally like reframed your whole thinking. But this book did. It made me go, oh shit, the stuff that I really thought I understood and believed about the world and who we are as people, like, this really made me look at the world in a different way. And I always can recount at, like, it was almost like a veil had been lifted. And I thought to myself, if I can create something in my lifetime that someone 200 years from now who has no connection to me, who never met me, maybe they're going to school on Mars, can be impacted by, that's the whole reason to be alive as far as I'm concerned. So what keeps me going, because I've had some dark periods where I couldn't pay the bills, where I didn't know how I was gonna get through it, is stories. Always stories are my drugs. Stories are my fuel. And seeing people light up, because Jay, I genuinely believe stories can change the world. That we are at this moment in time that everyone, all of you folks have grown up with, we're at such a inflection point of toxicity, and this is a really rough period that we're navigating in the course of this country's history and this world's history. And I think that when it feels like we're at our darkest and one side doesn't understand the other, whether it's political, social, cultural, I think stories can open hearts and change minds. That's why I do it. And I'm going to keep doing it until I'm no longer around.
That's awesome, Noam. I really truly love that. And I can say, as someone who knows you very well, I mean, you very much walk the talk, which I always appreciate that about you as well. Let me just kind of shift gears a little bit, because obviously, to be the success that you are and that you have been, you've really had to network yourself out there. Talk a little bit about that importance in terms of some of the ways that you go about doing it, and just because you obviously you taught here at LMU as well. You know a lot of college students as well, you know, that are just in the same place of our students here this evening. What's some advice that you could give them in terms of kind of best practices for networking?
Well, it's a great question. I'm going to say a couple of things. So there are, you know, invariably you guys are going to get some internships, and I think there are certain kind of organizations that are available to anyone with student membership. So whether it's Film Independent, that has like networking events and things like that that you can go to, and I think a student membership might be like $59 to $79 a year, which I know is not an insignificant amount of money, but I think that's worth considering. And the Sundance Institute or whatever. I'm going to say a couple things. That in addition, what you got to realize is that there's a lot of groups, and this is true in LA, and for those of you who are not originally from LA, there's a lot of film groups and film festivals where you can always offer up your services as a volunteer. There's so many different film festivals that go up here. And I was talking to an actor the other day, African-American actor, who said that he was volunteering at the LA French Film Festival that was going on at the Directors Guild. And I was like, do you speak French? And he's like, nope, but I just want to meet people. And it was a great opportunity to network. So the thing I'm going to say is realize that there are a number of communities, and this is true based on, you know, specific, more narrowly focused things, communities of Black filmmakers, Asian filmmakers, you know, all different kind of groups. But even, let's not even silo it in that way solely. More broadly, they're just, you know, people who are out here trying to get their stuff made and seen, and they have a lot of you know, get-togethers. So I use things like meetup.com, and I use all these other things where I'm like, if I want to meet new young talent, is there one man or one woman shows? Is there local theater that you can go support? I think you got to remember, if you're an artist, you need to surround yourself with other artists. And I am trying to always, even on days where, I mean, and obviously COVID sort of changed everything, but always just find ways to network and reach out. Join the right Reddit groups, follow the right threads on Twitter and Instagram, so that you can be at the center of the discussion that people are having. If you're a part of a particular fandom, try and get involved in the things that people are doing in support of the shows and creative content that they really like. Jay, that's sort of a long-winded way to say, you can't be a part of a community unless you're community minded. And I'm a big believer in saying that, you know what, with school and internships and life, you can go, man, I'm too tired to do everything. But if you're not out there every day trying to find the work that other artists are doing and connecting with local theater companies and local groups that are, you know, putting on screenings or doing whatever, how are you going to meet people who might be your partners in creating that next chapter and that next career? And that's what's important in insofar as that I think you have to be focused on remembering that this is not a solitary endeavor. It is a collaborative medium. Obviously, a lot of the people who you've met in film school are the closest in proximity to you. But if you're passionate about a thing, find other people who are also passionate about that thing and seek them out. It's hard. It's hard making friends nowadays, let alone trying to pursue things professionally. But I think doing that, staying abreast of the things that are relevant in your industry, by following the threads, knowing what the news is, knowing what the latest trends are, that's really what's gonna help make a difference. Because if you seek it out, you might be surprised by what you'll find. And guys, I'll be honest, there's a lot of cool stuff that's free. I'm not suggesting this is all stuff that you got to spend money on. So I will, Jay, provide you a link with some resources that you can share with the students.
Great.
And dad.
Thanks. I mean, that sounds great, Noam. And I'm sure everyone will get some use out of that. I'm wondering if you could just give us an example. I mean, obviously you haven't taught here for a couple of years, but you know, we've taught together, and you know, one of the students, I'm talking about Ashley, I think she's kind of a great case study, if you will, in terms of where she is with her career right now. It was maybe not exactly what she thought it would be while she was here in grad school, but maybe you could talk a little bit about her, because I know you've been working together on a few things.
Absolutely. So I taught at the school for 6 semesters up until right at the start of COVID. So obviously it's been a little bit. And one of the things, Jay, obviously that you and I did when we still had our company is that every semester, one of my students who, you know, the assignment at the end of the semester was they had to do a completed either script and show Bible and everything for like a web series, but it didn't need to be a traditional web series. It could be a VR concept or a game concept or a podcast concept. But we would always pick one student and they'd get kind of a first look deal with us at our company, Legion of Creatives. And every year there were a few that really stood out. So the two that come to mind is one that you mentioned, I think who graduated in 2018 or 2019, Ashley Marie Ryan. And great writer. She had written a really fun digital series that was called Intercourse PA, Intercourse Pennsylvania, which is actually the name of a community that's predominantly Amish. And it's about a group of women, feminists, like hippie feminists, who came to Intercourse PA to open the first sex toy shop. And I was like, it was so wild and it was so entertaining. And I thought she just really nailed it. And so we offered her the first look deal, and she developed really, you know, she had a real appetite for the esoteric and the occult, and was really writing a lot of concepts. So she wrote a story about the late actress Jane Mansfield, who interestingly enough is the mother of Mariska Hargitay, who's the star of Law and Order SVU. And Jane Mansfield's relationship with the founder of the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey. And it's this wild script. Actually, it's being, someone else is making that storyline into a movie now. But I thought that was really cool. And this was an area that she had a lot of knowledge and a lot of passion in. So fast forward to a year ago, she met a company that was like, we love what you're doing. Would you consider doing a podcast? And she launched a podcast called The Occult Unveiled, that it's now like the top witchcraft and esoteric podcast on iTunes, on Apple Podcast, whatever it's called. And I thought to myself, not only did a company pay her to create this IP, but some of the stories that come out of the episodes are great ideas for film and TV show and everything else. And I'm particularly excited about seeing how she's going to continue to grow with that. Another guy by the name of Daryl Fannin, he was fascinating. He was a veteran. He had been an Army medic and had just finished his second tour by the time he came to get his master's degree at LMU in film and television. And his story was wild because for the first 18 years of his life, he had never seen a movie or TV show because he was in a cult. And I was like, yo, you are the most fascinating dude. And he was a great writer. While he was just finishing up my class, and Jay, I know he took a class with you as well, he sold a show to Netflix that was executive produced by Matt Damon. It was called The Green Beret's Guide to Surviving the Apocalypse. They shot and produced the entire first season, and they were in post. And apparently one or two of the executives got caught up during the whole period right at the launch of Me Too, because they were awful human beings who deserved all the things that happened to them. And Netflix shelved the show, and they decided they were never going to air it. So can you imagine, you get your first big break, Matt Damon is executive producing your show, and never even sees the light of day. So he licked his wounds, and then he partnered up with Jimmy Kimmel, and they wrote a pilot that starred Bruce Campbell of the Evil Dead movies. And then ABC produced the pilot, but they decided not to pick it up for series. And then he kind of was like, what am I even doing? Like, I feel like everything has been an at bat, but I've struck out. And he moved back to Tennessee. He was living in a van down by the river, and then had an epiphany, and realized that, a lot of his friends were making a lot of money in crypto, and NFTs were kind of blowing up. But he saw where a lot of that was kind of vaporware. But he also realized that blockchain afforded creatives the opportunity to have a better way of tracking how their movies made money, how their content made money, and how they were getting paid for it. So he launched a blockchain studio called Kino, Kino, and they've raised a ton of money. They've had a roadshow all around Europe and in the States. And then he came back to Jay and I, he said, which was so lovely to hear, and so affirming in terms of, why Jay teaches, I think, why I teach. He said, you guys were two of my favorite professors. I want to support your films that you're making for yourselves and with other creatives. And we're in negotiations for his company right now to become the financier on 2 different projects that I'm making. And it kind of came full circle in a way. So I paid it forward, he paid it back, he paid it forward, we're going to pay it back. And the thing that was so gratifying was just seeing exceptional talent who was teaching us as much as we were teaching them, that let us ultimately succeed and do good work.
Yeah, no, it's amazing the work that Daryl and the team they've brought on board are currently doing with that. Well, no, if it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and just open it up for some questions, because I'm sure.
Absolutely. Jay, I've got about another 20 minutes, and I'm happy to take any questions.
That's perfect then. So let's go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you for talking to us. And it's funny, Albert Camus' The Stranger, reading that in sophomore year was like the thing that made me want to get into screenwriting as well.
Love that.
British literature and Kafka and everything. So when you said that, I was just like, oh my gosh, I relate to that a lot. And but I guess kind of my main question is, so I'm someone who's Filipino, and a lot of my scripts that I've written, they relate to my Filipino identity and that side of me growing up. And I've kind of noticed that there seems to be kind of like a divide between like sort of the scripts that I want to write, and it feels like the scripts that are more marketable or draw more attention. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice for like, trying to sort of balance that out between like trying to write something that you're really passionate about and is super personal to you. Because I know that like things I write that are like are more on like the marketable high concept side. They can be really personal to me, but I really want to try and learn to simultaneously tap into the personal side of my identity, the Filipino side, while also creating stuff that larger audiences want to see. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice for like trying to put myself out there more and like try and balance those two sides.
So it's a great question. And I'm gonna sort of jump around in my response a little bit. I look at someone like Joe Coy, who obviously had the recent success with Easter Sunday as something that was very kind of forward leaning in its Filipino identity. And the thing you always wonder to yourself is, are the personal things so inside your cultural identity that they don't share sort of a universality with kind of an experience that someone who's not Filipino can also have as well? And what I mean by that is simply the following: is I think there's two sort of ways to approach it here. One is there's a number of stories that can be universal that can still have Filipino characters in them. And I think that part of an opportunity that you potentially have is just reframing how, because obviously the cinema of the Philippines is very kind of robust in its own right, but reframing how the Filipino American experience is bigger and broader than I think how most people, and forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn, but most people I know who are exposed to Filipinos tend to meet them in the concept of like nursing, which by the way, I always find really funny, and I call such BS on every doctor show on TV, whether it's Grey's Anatomy or Chicago Med or everything else. I'm like, where the hell are the Filipino nurses? Because they represent a big part of the the infrastructure of medical care. But forgive that slight detour. But my sense here really is twofold. I'm a big believer in one for you, one for them, which is if you have bigger, more marketable things, make them. Because the more success you have in that market, the more currency you have to make the things that are more personal to you. I don't think one has to come at the expense of the other. But what I do believe is that you have to find a way to understand the needs of the marketplace and see where the opportunities are. Now, look, the truth of the matter is there can be those really personal Filipino stories that can also integrate a more universal theme where you can find some actors who maybe are in fact Filipino. What's the guy who was on The Good Place? Manny Jacinto, was that his name? I think he's Filipino. I may be saying his name wrong, if so forgive me.
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
I haven't seen The Good Place. Yeah, I haven't. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so my only point is, there are two things. The business has changed so fundamentally that actors who maybe were accustomed to working on a television show or for 20 episodes a season, now they get 8 or 10 episode seasons. And you will actually find that a lot of talent is really open to read things and consider opportunities that they might not have done before. And if you find a champion in the business, that fundamentally changes what it is that you're trying to do. But I think I'm sort of taking a long way around to answer your question, which is the advice is don't stop telling the personal stories, and also figure out how some Filipino themes and ideas can go into the bigger, more marketable things, because I don't think they're not mutually exclusive. One does not have to come at the expense of the other, but figure out who some of the leading Filipino American creatives are, reach out to them through social media, through LinkedIn, through IMDb Pro to try and find out the connections, and just see what they're doing and how maybe you might be able to send things to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was great.
That's good. Noam, I'm going to move to the other side here where I can see everyone with questions because my back's kind of to everybody. So who else has a question for Noam? Now that I can see all of you. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I have So I've been a gamer my whole life, and I really appreciate you bringing up like how huge the gaming industry is. I love competitive games. I'll be honest, that's probably what takes up most of my actual video game playing time. But some of the most meaningful experiences I've had with stories have been with story-driven video games. I do wonder if within the business, I don't know if you have more perspective on this. This is something that I'm just not like, I don't have a ton of experience with. I guess I wonder, like, do you think there is the potential for those story games to be bringing in that revenue? Because it seems to me just that, like, as somebody who's playing these games, it seems to me that the biggest games are always the non-story games, with a few exceptions, right? Like the games that are bringing in the revenue are the games with microtransactions and the competitive online games and your Fortnites and your Call of Duties and stuff like that.
So I got 3 words for you. Last of Us. The truth of the matter is that story games, they kind of require a different muscle. And I do think that, yeah, it goes without saying that World of Warcraft, League of Legends, all those other things, that the competitive aspect of gaming exists in its own sort of echelon, in a manner of speaking. But story games are just at the beginning of really what the opportunities are. I got to tell you, not only the animatic for Last of Us, but just really the story itself. Like, I'm so excited for the show just because I want to see if it can be as good as the game, to be honest. And so the answer to your question is yes. I think that there's a huge untapped market for what that can be, but I'd like to think that people like you can really figure out what that, as someone so passionate about that space, so what that fertile ground is, because there are a ton of games that have that potential, things that are going to be out in the marketplace in the next 2 to 3 to 5 years. But admittedly, there's a lot more to be done there that I think takes it even to a whole new level. And conversely, I'm also interested in we often talk about these Marvel Cinematic Universe and these interconnected story worlds. I also just love the idea of watch a show or watch a movie, and to get the continuation of a story, you have to play the game. I think there's just really fascinating untapped potential there. The median age of gamers is now a lot older. It's skewing a lot more female than it ever did before. And I think that it is your generation that's really going to tip it over in terms of what it can become and how it will be a paradigm shift. Because I don't know about you guys. Jay and I won an Emmy in VR. I'm very active in that space, but I haven't seen the story yet that had that same Camus, the Stranger-like effect on me, that had the same effect as like Citizen Kane, if you consider that to be a good movie, that is so transformative that it literally changes the paradigm of how stories are told utilizing this medium. The medium is the message. I think that's true in games, and I know that potential exists. And I'll be honest with you, I think there are a lot of games that are not even really made by or for Western English-speaking audiences that are really exploring some fascinating things. The other thing I really want to encourage you guys, and I hope enough of you do it, but some of the dopest cinema, some of the dopest storytelling right now is not even in English. It's in Korean. It's in Farsi because it's coming from Iran. It's coming from Israel and all these different places. Do me a favor, make sure that you add to your media diet stuff that is not in English, because there's just great stuff happening. And that's even true in games. You have to expose yourself to it, because now more than ever, this is a global business.
Sure. Do you have a question?
Yes.
As somebody who's entering the workforce shortly in the next coming month or two, I was wondering if you had any advice in kind of picking, not necessarily a first job, but a job that kind of meets all of the expectations of a multi-interested person, because you've covered a lot of ground in your career. I was wondering if there was any moment in time where you felt anxious about starting a job that you didn't like, or if you didn't necessarily know what the right path was and how you maybe came to making that decision for yourself?
So I'm going to start with the last question, which is to say, I'm going to bastardize the expression, but it's like, you know, God laughs when you make plans, which is, I never knew the path. The path was, I was excited to work in the creative industries. And I had, when I was a kid, I had adults who were like, oh, you seem reasonably with it and can follow instructions and can, you know, think critically. So here's a job and that'll lead to another job. And look, the thing I always knew is that if I could never do a job that didn't have some creative component to it in terms of writing or filmmaking or doing whatever. In terms of the question you initially posed, look, if you're still trying to figure out exactly what it is you're most passionate about, I would say the right kind of job for you is working at a creative agency, whether it's a film marketing and advertising agency or a brand marketing and advertising agency, because the truth of the matter is those are the kinds of jobs that tend to give you the opportunity to play in a lot of different spaces. You can write and produce and create on numerous fronts simultaneously. No one's waiting to ask you to do it. You just have to step up and figure it out. BuzzFeed could be a cool place to work because, you know, Quinta Brunson, who now is a huge star with Abbott Elementary, that's where she got her start. So I tend to say if you're a creative practitioner who's still trying to figure out exactly what your sweet spot is, then go somewhere where you can do a lot of different things, because then that'll help you figure out what you're good at and what you're most passionate about.
Thank you.
That answer the question?
Yeah, it does. I appreciate it.
All right, last one.
How do you maintain such a positive attitude in an industry with such uncertainty?
That's a great last question.
Medication. No, I'm kidding. Look, this is, and this is especially true coming out of the pandemic. I think everyone collectively is just having a really hard time. Politics has created a toxicity that has ended friendships and familial relationships. COVID did a number on people, whether you were anti-vax, pro-vax, whatever. And I think I'm a big believer in two things, that I try to extend people a lot of grace, even if they're not necessarily all that deserving of it, because you don't know somebody's story until you walk a mile in their shoes. You don't know what they're dealing with, what their home life is like, what sort of abuses they've dealt with, particularly if they're a marginalized person, etc. So I try to always approach the world with empathy and understanding. And by the way, try being the operative word, because I don't always succeed, and my wife can absolutely attest to that as well. But look, the thing I'm most hopeful about is that I have seen the transformative effect of what we do. We're in a business that, yes, is very transactional and can be very vapid and energy draining. But I also know that, as opposed to just watching a movie at home on your couch by yourself, when you're in a room with a dark room with 200 strangers looking at flickering images on a screen, and you're all laughing together and crying together and having a moment together, and that's true at a concert, and that can be true at a play, and that can be true at anything. That's kind of the whole reason we're alive and we're doing this crazy thing, is to find that one moment of connection, that one moment of understanding, that one moment of grace. And I've seen that over and over and over again, and that gives me hope. I have plenty of bad days. I have plenty of days, and Jay and I often do, where we're like, what the hell are we doing? Like, let's go, you know, open a coffee shop in you know, the Midwest and just kind of put ourselves out of our misery. But I gotta tell you, the power of story can and is and will continue to change the world. And that's what keeps me going.
No, that's amazing. Thank you.
Guys, I really appreciate it. I wish all of you continued success. If you want to follow me on socials on Twitter and Instagram, which is mostly where I am, because TikTok is I'm a little old for, is it's nomenclature, spelled NOAMENCLATURE.
Awesome.
Thank you
Thanks,
guys. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.